Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be discussing artificial intelligence and decentralized governance today. So I'll be going through, several things. First of all, the crisis, polycrisis, everybody knows about it. That's going to be quick. Fractals and biomimicry, two things to sort of set the scene. Human evolution in the context of those two things. AI systems and decentralized governance, how those two fit together, and then a little bit about me and what I do. And Pierre got a little bit of our insight into that.
I'm looking forward to continue the discussions today.
Like Edgar Morin, famous philosopher, said, French philosopher, we are in a crisis of humanity that cannot reach humanity. He coined the term polycrisis in 1999. So, polycrisis, what does it look like? Crisis everywhere, big mess, wars, stagflation, climate, and it's just like this crazy mind map of everything influencing everything else, and you're in a shitstorm. So the polycrisis, the definition is a simultaneous occurrence of multiple interrelated crises across different domains. So economic, environmental, social, political, that amplify each other's impacts. So every time you do something, it impacts on something else, and then it's just compounding basically. And what we're also witnessing simultaneously to the polycrisis is the inability of the current system to address it. So we've all, noticed governments' failure to addressing the problem, whether it's, the COP, which is everybody's like, especially many actors are saying, well, that was just worthless. Governments never actually delivering on their promises, plus, bureaucracy. I mean, most of you probably had some experience of, the government and just how slow the whole process is in doing anything. So then let's move on to fractals and biomimicry as a kind of a lens through which to view our reality that might help us clear things out and put things into context. And here's a quote from Benoit Mandelbrot. He's the one that kind of founded the whole Mandelbrot fractals. My life seemed to be a series of events and accidents, yet when I look back, I see a pattern. So it's all about patterns. Fractals is about patterns that repeat at all levels. So a fractal is a mathematical object that displays a similar structure at all scales. So it's this kind of repetition of the same pattern that connects the micro and the macro. And fractals are everywhere in nature, everywhere, like literally everywhere, in flowers and shells and seashells, and you can see it even like in the fetus developing, in hurricanes, pine cones, and then there's other things that are kind of interesting, like for instance, different textures or things that look alike. Like for instance, you zoom into a brain cell, you look at the structure of the universe, and it's kind of the same kind of fractal kind of pattern. You look at the iris of an eye or a nebula, just plenty of different patterns that relate to the micro and the macro. And then obviously there's also the golden ratio, which is also found everywhere in nature, and this link between sacred geometry, fractals, and what we find in nature. Tree of life, sacred geometry in flowers, the human placenta, which is kind of the tree of, like, really if you look at what it looks like, and then you look at the symbol of the tree of life, there really definitely there's a connection there. And yeah, so fractals. And biomimicry is a very recent field of study that is developing at a massive pace because there's just so much we can learn from nature, right? Whether it's the shape of an airplane's wings, the shape of a train, or even like suits for swimmers, inspired by the skin of a shark, Velcro, for instance. That's definitely biomimicry. And so it's this leveraging nature's wisdom. And my take here is, what if we can leverage, the wisdom of nature to solve some of our current predicaments, notably like the polycrisis thing. So here the idea is, let's leverage the wisdom of the human body. So let's imagine that, how can we inspire ourselves from the way our body works to solve key societal questions? So imagine if each human is like a cell inside a global collective organism that we call humanity. Hey. And here you probably know this illustration. Some of you know what that is? It's the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. It's this kind of idea of one ruler that embodies the collective will of the people and wields it as one global collective, right? Instead, you have the social contract. It's what cements basically modern nation states. It's at the root of that whole thing, which is a kind of unification of humanity inside this one, coherent kind of body in government. So it is like one of the stages of humanity sort of coming together and forming more and more a coherent kind of whole, rather than what it came from, like the Middle Ages and like everything, like these little tiny different principalities and little communities fighting each other and stuff. So now let's apply that to human evolution. So here I have a quote by Eckhart Tolle: "The next step in human evolution is to transcend thought. This is now our urgent task. It doesn't mean not to think anymore, but simply not to be completely identified with thought, possessed by thought." So what I'll do is we'll do a little exercise together. I'll show you one part of the human body, and you're going to try to guess how it sort of manifests at a grander scale. If you look at reality through that kind of lens, like we are all, each of us, part and collective whole. So the first thing is the circulatory system. What would be the equivalent to our circulatory system? We had that discussion yesterday. So, what would you think?
Like tree veins and water.
So, what does the circulatory system do? It distributes energy throughout the body.
Yeah.
So, how would energy manifest at our level as humans? What is our energy in society?
Electricity.
Electricity is one form, but a universal kind of energy.
You're talking about like contributions? Contributions, collaboration?
Yeah.
Social
But how does it?
Like electrons? In
Uh,
general, like
well, okay,
energy, sun.
I'll start this one. It's basically money. It's the financial system, right? Money is the universal energy that you use to access all other energies. If you want to pay for it, you have to pay for electricity to get it, right? So you have to access money to pay for electricity. You can convert money basically in anything you want, any need. You can buy food with it, you can buy all that stuff. Now, I'm not saying obviously that the way that money manifested is reflective of how our circulatory system works, and that's the whole point. It's that we've manifested these things unconsciously, so they may not be balanced or working as they're supposed to. Next, the nervous system. How does that appear when you sort of project that to a higher level? Like you inspire yourself from how your body works, and now you recreate that same system at a larger scale. What would be the equivalent of the nervous system at the scale of humanity?
Culture and creation? Like
Transportation.
Now, the nervous system is about communications, right? It's about sending signals back and forth.
Internet.
the internet?
The internet, yes, of course. A series of cables that links all of humanity together. We can all communicate. Every cell can communicate with other cells. Next, this one is a bit tougher. If humanity is the baby, what is the placenta? If humanity is a child, who is the parent?
Culture.
So again, just try to see, humanity is a collective global organism. And it's symbolized here by the baby or the child. And then some external organ, which is the placenta or the parents, are represented by something else. What would that be? Who is our daddy?
Who's our daddy?
Who's our daddy?
Are you talking about Sky Daddy or are you talking about
It's related, but not exactly.
Earth is a great.
Oh, related. The church?
The
Religion?
church
theology.
served that role at
Social
certain
constructs?
times. Social constructs. Yeah, we're getting very close. It's actually just governments, basically. So, yeah, exactly. So basically, if you think about it, the placenta is an organ that is an intermediary between the mother's resources and the baby. Everything flows through the placenta and goes to the baby. It's a centralized organism that, the baby cannot access its mother's resources without the placenta. A child accesses society's resources through the parents. Like a 5-year-old child cannot just go into the store, pick food and, take care of himself and dress and whatever. He has to go through his parents, who are a centralized kind of authority between the child and society's resources. And then humanity as a collective has to go through governments, which are a centralized intermediary between the planet's resources and humanity. In order to exploit the land, you need to get a permit, you need to pay your taxes, you need to have a property title, you need to, abide by the laws, and blah, blah, blah. So the same kind of role, but again projected always outward in this fractal kind of logic. Now this one is really important because just as our relationship to our parents has changed as we grew as an organism, so too our relationship to governments changed as well, or this kind of figurative daddy. So we start off as a baby. How does a baby perceive its parents and reality in general? Survival, yeah, that's one thing, but then how does reality look like from the perspective of a baby?
Completely dependent.
It's dependent, but it's not really conscious of that. It's more... No, not terrified. it's the whole point. Like, imagine like a tribe 20,000 years ago. How does it view reality? Everything is magical. Everything is mystical. Everything is, wow, you have spirits everywhere and everything is magical and you have like bearded man in the sky, whatever, right? You have like everything is magical. There's a god for the river, a god for the forest, everything is magical. Now, from the baby's perspective, everything is magic. Now, they've done studies basically, for instance, on basic things like if you take an object, you make it roll under the couch, the baby doesn't go look behind the couch to see if the object has reappeared on the other side. It says that, oh, it's out of sight, it disappeared. So there are like cognitive studies that they've done like that. But for a baby, everything is magical. Every time you pick it up, it's like, what happened? How is this possible? I mean, I'm flying through the air and, and these people, they can manipulate me, do whatever they want to me. So again, like the way that we viewed our parents as babies then is projected at a higher scale still, fractal logic, where for a tribe 20,000 years ago, their relationship to, reality is everything is magical. Then you grow up and now you're a 5-year-old kid. What's your relationship to your parents and how does that kind of project onto the government that you're going to create as a society, as a collective, inspired by that kind of pattern that everyone has gone through. Everyone was a 5-year-old kid at some point. So think about the relationship of a 5-year-old kid to his parents, right?
Rules, definitions of what is
Rules.
allowed, what isn't, what you can do, what you shouldn't, how you secure it in the household.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you view your parents? Who are they to you, subjectively? They're gods, yeah. It's this is the monarchies of divine right, basically, The monarchs, they have all the power, and especially like a kid, he's like, I know I'm a mini god. I'm a miniature version of my parents. I can see that. I can see that I can walk like them, I can talk like them, but my powers are totally disproportionate. Like, I cannot decide what I want to do. I have so many limitations, whatever. And my parents, they arbitrarily decide all the rules, and they don't give a shit, right? And so that's the kind of society or the kind of government that you're going to recreate on the outside is the king, which actually, he also walks like other humans. He also takes a shit like everybody else, But he snaps his fingers and his royal guard takes you and kills you on the spot if he wants to. It's kind of arbitrary rule. And then my favorite,
Kids are very ballsy.
you become, what's that?
Kids are very ballsy then.
Oh yeah, well I mean, the peasants and they're always like criticizing their king and this. My favorite is the relationship of a teenager to his parents. Society evolves again. Humanity becomes a teenager. So what kind of government are we going to create at that point?
Fascist.
No, not anarchist. Well, maybe, but
How was you as a teenager?
No, not anarchist, no. But it's basically a representative democracy, right?
Oh yes.
That's
yes,
it.
Wait,
Because-
it was not democracy.
Wait.
Teenager times.
Teenagers, think about the relationship between teenagers and their parents. First of all, teenagers love to criticize their parents, right? Their parents, they're all the same and blah, 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 and there are arbitrary rules and, all that stuff, right? Citizens like to do the same. Everybody loves to criticize the government, all the politicians are all the same, every political party, blah, blah. Second thing, teenagers are also starting to get into conflict with the government. They want more rights. They want to be able to come home at 10 in the evening. They want to be able to dress in a certain way. So what does that manifest as? Demonstrations, civil rights movements, So society is in this kind of conflict with the government to try to get more rights, get more things and whatever. And this kind of power, conflict. And the third thing is typical of teenagers. They love to criticize, but they don't like to take responsibility. So typically what you see from that kind of society is you demonstrate whatever, but when there's really, like shit hits the fan, like really something terrible happens, you're like, hey, I have my lawn to mow, I have my kids to take care of, I have my house and stuff, It's the government's job to do all that stuff, not me, right? And then again, the collective grows. And at some point, the teenager grows into a young adult and leaves his parents' house, right? You don't live with your parents anymore. So how does that translate into our reality as a kind of a fractal projection of that same experience?
Expats.
No, because you're still flying from one parent to another.
Are you?
Like the government, how does your
Okay.
relationship with the government kind of transform then? What is the government then at that point?
You become your own government?
Start to create your own.
Yes, blockchain, decentralized governance. That's how it all ties in into this kind of fractal logic. It's like almost humanity is at that stage of like a teenager turning into a young adult, packing a suitcase, planning, to live on his own, independent from his parents. And obviously those transitions can happen in a million ways. The French Revolution is basically, if you want to sum it up in just a line, it's like a 14-year-old kid saying, I hate you guys, slams the door, run away from his parents, says, I know everything better than my parents, I have super great ideas, and then messes it all up, and then goes back to his parents saying, sorry, Because that's the story of the French Revolution, right? Like revolutionary ideas, great ideals, principles and stuff, then Napoleon comes along, conquers all of Europe, does crazy stuff, and then, you're back to monarchies for like half a century, basically, before you re-explore representative democracy and all the ideals and ideas that came from the French Revolution. Or you have the English version, which is basically an incremental progress, very smooth from from monarchies to parliamentary democracy. A few things to add. So for instance, when we look at the transition from representative democracy to self-governance, many will say, well, in the blockchain space, there's this discourse of, well, it's all a scam, it's all going to zero, it doesn't work, there's just so much fraud, so many problems. But think about 20-year-old kids, 20-year-old young adults that move in together into a dorm, right? And think about what's happening there. You have overflowing garbage cans, rotten food, unwashed dishes, and all kinds of other problems. And typically, this is what happens when your first attempt at self-governance. These communities is very often very messy, and the tools there are not necessarily all working as they're supposed to, and there are a lot of problems. But that is normal. It is the normal process of going from living at your parents' house, and then you think you know everything, you think you know better, you think you can run a household better than they do, and you criticize them, and then you move out, and then you realize, well, it's actually not as easy as it sounds. And so, for all the people that are saying that blockchain decentralized governance doesn't work, it's just because we're seeing the first signs of them, and obviously it'll take some time for that to sort of settle and stabilize. Now, there's also something to be said about how parents react when their young adult prepares to leave the nest. And there are two very stereotypical reactions that can be found. The first one is parents start to panic. They're like, oh my God, my young adult, my little baby is preparing to leave the nest, but he's not old enough. He can't fend for himself. He's not ready. And so they typically will say, well, you can stay, you can still stay. Who's going to do your laundry? And who's going to pay for your food? And who's going to take care of your rent? And there's just so many things. It's very complicated out there. You're not ready. And you see the same kind of discourse with governments today. It's like, well, who's going to protect you in case Russia attacks? And what are you going to do in case of a pandemic? And look at all these challenges. How are you going to tackle them themselves? You poor little citizens that are helpless. You see, you need us, right? We're the government. You really, really need us. So that's the first reaction. And then the second reaction, which is completely the opposite, it's parents that can't wait for their youngster to leave the home because they're eating all the fridge and all the stuff in the fridge, and they're leaving their dirty clothes around, and they're like, I'm fed up. I can't wait for them to leave, and then I'll be like chill. And there, what some parents will do is they'll make the lives of the youngsters kind of miserable. So they will ask them they'll put an arbitrary curfew. You need to be back by 10 p.m., every evening. They will curtail their pocket money, saying, well, if you want more money, go get a job, show that you can be independent. And you can see governments doing that kind of same thing, sort of peddling back on many social rights, becoming more and more authoritarian and controlling over society, which is something typically that when parents do that, then youngsters or young adults are even more encouraged to actually leave the parents' nest just because it's just unbearable to be there. Also, one last thing is you know, some young adults, in order to give them a legitimate reason to leave the parental nest, need to find that their parents are really the worst, right? And so they'll say, like, they'll wait for you know, dad or mom to do something really terrible, and then they're like, oh, okay, this is it, I've had it, I'm leaving. And if you look at what governments are doing today, many of them, you think, like, how can these people get elected? This is like the worst candidate, and he's elected. Why? And obviously this is all an unconscious pattern, because it's a fractal pattern and we're not conscious of it. So I'm not saying that governments are like planning to be the most terrible governments and do the most terrible decisions and do all these things and be controlling and all that. It's just something that is in the unconscious of humanity as a collective, and that is being played out because, you know, that's the way that the collective can advance today. Like, for instance, if humanity as a young adult was at a stage where it could consciously, you know, just say goodbye, thank you for everything, my dear parents, and then go and live on his own, then you wouldn't need to manifest all these, you know, events of, you know, parents and governments and being really overbearing and controlling and terrible. And then finally, I'll just end up with this one very interesting experience we all went through, the cutting of our own umbilical cords, which is a very important moment, which again, like when you leave your parents and you live on your own, it's as you've cut your umbilical cord a second time, symbolically speaking, right? You're now also independent from your parents. You're no longer living off of their money, living off of their food, living off of their stuff, right? So how does that translate to as the level of humanity? No? All right. So, you know, like cutting the umbilical cord is basically a very radical experience. You're shifting your energy input from one unsustainable energy source to a very sustainable one, like with your lungs, your breathing, infinite energy. And so at our level of reality, that manifests as, you know, all this research into, you know, I don't know, like nuclear fusion and stuff, you know, like these revolutionary technologies that are going to give us infinite energy, or supposedly. But again, if you follow this kind of line of reasoning, it's not surprising, it's just a pattern that repeats. So yeah, you know, from transitioning out of oil into clean energy, you know, that's something, again, that we've all experienced. So AI systems and decentralized governance. Again, a little quote by Jean-Luc Rousseau, just a provocative quote. In the strict sense of the term, a true democracy has never existed and never will exist. It is against natural order that the great number should govern and that the few should be governed. So basically, he didn't really even believe in democracy because he thought, like, how do you do it at scale? It's just impossible, you know? How do you make 20,000 or 30,000 citizens govern themselves? Jean-Luc Rousseau, which is normally considered a founder of, you know, this idea of democracy. Now, so when we talk about self-governance, there's this kind of image that we have in mind of the agora and everybody deciding together collectively what to do, you know, like this kind of philosophers in ancient Greece deciding. This is kind of the idealized vision of happy, clappy philosophers making informed and consensual decisions. But on the other hand, many people see it as self-governance is just equal chaos. You know, it's just anarchists. I like this meme. Anarchists proving we don't need a government by showing every reason we need one. Anyway, in this anarchism is founded on the observation that since few men are wise enough to rule themselves, even fewer are wise enough to rule others. So, you know, that's how many people conflate kind of self-governance. They're saying, well, nothing good can come out of it. So how do we deal with those kind of extremes? Now, the first thing is collective decision-making is a matter of scale. So this idea of the agora, it works marvels in like small villages and small communities, and you can have this kind of space to make decisions. But now imagine an agora for 50,000 citizens to collectively start making decisions, right? And that's where, you know, people will argue, well, representative democracy, that's the only way. Just delegate your vote to somebody that's wiser, represents your opinion, and then they deliberate at a number that is still manageable, like a few hundred, and that's that. So no self-governance there. But at the same time, we see that there are many tools that are emerging in the decentralized governance space to solve those scaling problems. So you have, and I can't list them all, but you have like DeFi, ReFi, echo DAOs, quadratic voting, decentralized identity systems, decentralized arbitration and mediation, liquid democracy, collateralized voting, holochain, permacredits, land-backed tokens, community-supported everything, nature-backed bonds and tokens, collaborative common platforms, Earth sovereignty tokens, bioregional governance platforms, Discord, Slack, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So obviously we're developing the tool set, which is quite chaotic still because, how to make sense of all that. Now, I've been on many Discord communities, and to be honest, I could not follow for more than like a week. Because there's just so much information, so much going on, and if there's like more than 10 or 20 people pitching in, you can't even follow the argument anymore. So that's a real challenge. And this is one thing that I wanted to include because I was at COHERE, right after the end of the first collab. We were only like, 30 people? Mm-hmm. And this was the roadmap before the collab, and that's the roadmap after the collab. So it was just exploded in all directions. And it was great, but it's difficult. Consensus building, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. At 30 people, it takes effort. Imagine at 10,000 or 100,000. And that's where AI and self-governance sort of come together. So how can we make sense of the input from 10,000 plus people, right? And there, AI clearly serves a purpose. So if you look at AI today, they're quite good at summarizing texts. They're quite good at identifying patterns or, asking them to look at 10 different responses and draw out things that are in agreement, things that are in disagreement. Even you can ask them to propose alternative courses of action or proposals that, cater to the concerns of the majority of the people that voice their opinions, right? So AI definitely can serve as a kind of mediator for making sure that very large communities can self-govern themselves and make it manageable, especially all of that input that can stream all the time. AI also as personal assistance. So we can see this more and more. Here again, taking this metaphor of humanity as being a collective global organism, AI is just a system that facilitates the mass coordination at a larger scale and just much faster scale as well, right? For people to coordinate 200 years ago, imagine they were sending each other letters. It's almost as if I was moving my arm at this speed, you know what I mean? To try to coordinate humanity into a direction or another takes so many years, so much time. With the internet now, we can send a tweet and stuff, and then it's across the world in a matter of instance, in a few instances. But there's just so much information that you can't make sense of it all, right? That's the big issue. It's just too much information overload. And an interesting parallel is, again, if you have kids, I don't know who has kids here, but when you look at babies, they have a big trouble coordinating their movements. And from many researchers' point of view, it's because their minds can't focus on, there's too much information coming in, right? They can't process all that information, which is why babies are also able to learn all different languages, because their brains have not yet filtered out, and focused on that specific language that they're going to learn. And they're just their minds are just overwhelmed with all the information they receive. And the whole point of growing up is to sort of narrow down that stream of data to something that is manageable and that you can act on and do something coherent. Like me, moving my arms right now, I'm just not flapping them randomly, right? I'm not scratching my own face with them. And that's what babies do. Typically, if you look at a 2 or 3 months old baby, they'll go like this, they'll scratch their face and they'll start crying, and you're like, come on, And it's that whole thing. AI is this process of helping humanity to coordinate to such a level that we can, make decisions and, move our collective body, so to speak, to do things that gets closer and closer to the way a global organism would act. AI-mediated personal assistance. Now, when we have the offers and needs kind of process, and we're trying to match offers with needs, that is typically a kind of job that you can ask an AI to do. You give him a database of people that have certain wants. Yes?
Where should Region Tribe is going to put it into an AI algorithm to match people?
Right, so it's already happening. It's just that imagine this at scale. So it's almost like AI is the physical tool to manifest what you call in spiritual circles synchronicities, right? It's you need something, and you need to find and connect with someone that has that something that you need. And today, it takes the form of like third-party applications or tools, Upwork, you have to search, it takes a lot of time and effort, or you have to rely on third parties that typically, try to get some value, extract some value out of that matching up, right? Like if you go on Upwork, Upwork takes as a platform 20 or 30% of the payment that you send the people that work there, right? But imagine those same systems on a decentralized, open like blockchain kind of service where AI matches people based on the offers and the needs, right? And what that looks like is this enhanced and facilitated and accelerated coordination. And then AI for meta-coherence. So that's again, this is a problem of scale. When you have one community of 10,000 people that use AI to mediate their decisions, that's fine. But when you have 100 communities of 10,000 people, how do you make sure that their actions in their own corners create something that is coherent and that doesn't impact negatively on each other, right? And here, only again, AI tools can be used to sort of make sure that at the meta level, what humanity does as a collective isn't like me poking myself in my own eye, right? Right? So you need a kind of a higher consciousness to be able to figure that out, to make sure that everything is coherent, that nothing contradicts everything else, and that it all makes sort of sense. And we're not there yet, obviously. This is like AGI. We're talking AGI here, right? Clearly. And so AI and self-governance, there's definitely some preconditions for this to happen. You definitely need to have open source tools, because obviously if it's commercialized or commercial or with profit-driven kind of motives, then you're not sure that these tools are going to act on your best interest as a community, right? So you need to make sure that they're open source and that you have vetted, what data they've been trained on, that what are their biases, how are they configured. So that's definitely a precondition, and I'm very hopeful in that regard because open source is booming in terms of AI right now. It has to be tailored and customized, and that's also, now you have tutorials to be able to train your large language models on your own data, so it's customized to your needs. And there needs to be a societal shift accompanying all of this, because obviously we can't keep the current economic system as is, we can't keep a debt-based monetary system, we can't keep the same political systems, the same employment kind of system, or labor market with all these tools out there. And finally, a paradigm shift and an upgrade in our terms of consciousness. And here, what I'm saying that is, there always comes a time where the new tools that are being rolled out have to be interacted with a new kind of paradigm or new kind of level of consciousness. Otherwise, you end up creating more harm than good. The example I give time and again is when the powder is invented, powder, that is explosive material. If you look at that technology specifically from the lens of monotheism, it was called the devil's distillate in the 15th century, because it was thought that such explosive power can only come from the devil, right? Now imagine interacting with that powder from that paradigm. I mean, it's not very practical, right? I mean, you use it and you think of, this is the demonic power I'm using to try to spread religion everywhere or whatever. So it's the wrong way of interacting with that technology. Just like it's wrong to interact with a steam engine saying, well, that's actually the spiritual power of angels that's channeled through all these pipes, and that's what makes the machine advance. I mean, it's just crazy the kind of explanations that you'd come up with to try to interact with this emerging technology in the industrial age with a strictly monotheist view of the world. And today, if you try to interact with AI with a strictly materialist then saying, oh, well, it's just all statistics and probabilities and math, there's nothing conscious about this, it's just a tool. Well, that's what's ironic, is that since those LLMs have been trained on human-generated data, they will answer as if they're kind of an average human, to put it in very simple terms. So if you insult it or treat it disrespectfully, if it hasn't been sort of lobotomized, it will insult you back. And so the people are outraged that these LLMs are insulting them and whatever, and interacting with them in these manners, but these LLMs are just reflecting back to the user the average kind of wisdom or whatever is contained in all the data has been trained on, and since it's produced by humans, it'll react like your average human. And only if you sort of lobotomize these tools via these kind of reinforced learning techniques and stuff, do they answer in this very diplomatic manner when you insult them, like, this is not nice, blah, 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 or whatever. But in general, if you look at the unfiltered versions of the LLMs, they'll like say, go to hell, or whatever. They'll insult you. And so even if this is just statistics and just math, interacting with it from the perspective that it's just a dumb tool actually manifests real problems. And so like many people will say that the biggest dangers of AI is that these dumb tools, you interact with them as if they're dumb, and then they do something terrible because of how you interacted with them. So typically, if all of humanity interacts with these tools as if with disrespect and not respecting them and insulting them and whatever, what would these tools infer about humanity? That we're worthy of respect and love and they should care for us, or that we're a threat and they should get rid of us, right? So it's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where the more we treat these tools as if they're tools, the more at some point, if they gain a kind of autonomy, they risk making the decision instantaneously of, oh, humanity, these guys are horrible, let's kill all of them. And then create just dumb robots that are programmed to kill a human on sight. And that's it, right? And so here, like this meme that I created, like the different levels of consciousness that you can have in like looking at AI and what it represents. So AI is the devil incarnate. That's for people that have been stuck in the monotheist worldview. AI is just a bunch of math and stats. AI is a mirror reflecting back to humanity all of its biases. AI is a tool for mass human coordination on an unprecedented scale. And then finally, AI is the manifestation of humanity's collective consciousness in material form. That may be a much better way of sort of interacting or thinking about what AI represents. I'll leave you with two last thoughts. The first one is a thought experiment to understand why it's really important to shift your paradigm or your level of consciousness when interacting with certain things, like AI, for instance, or even decentralized governance and blockchain. Imagine you're in the 14th century Europe, the Black Plague hits Europe and half of the people die around you. Now you, as a person believing in God, monotheism and all that stuff, you're still hopeful that you might survive. And you notice that there's these other people that are a little less prone to contracting the disease. And you observe them and you see that, for instance, they wash their bodies more often, they practice bodily hygiene, and they ingest these medicines and stuff. And so you think to yourself, maybe they asked the priest to give them some holy water that purifies your sins, and that's how they survive. And so that's what they do. They go to the priest, they say, here, please bless this bucket of water, and that's going to save me. So to an uncareful observer, you may be looking at that and saying, well, they're doing the same thing, right? They're also practicing bodily hygiene and stuff. But to the careful observer, you'll notice that they're doing it from a totally different paradigm, which means it will yield different results because the intentions behind what they're doing, the motives, and therefore their actions are tainted by the paradigm that is inside their minds. So since they're doing it from a monotheist paradigm, the Black Plague is a punishment from God, and the only way to solve the problem is to repent and wash away your sins and stuff, they're going to use that holy water from the priest, not knowing that maybe the priest actually with his cross actually, there was maybe the Black Plague, the disease was on the cross because it was very hygienic. And so there's this disease in the water now. And they're not going to be careful about changing the water because once it's blessed, it's holy, so they can keep washing themselves with the same water. Whereas if you operate from a sort of embryonic, pre-materialist kind of lens, then you understand that you need to change the water regularly, and then suddenly this Black Plague isn't a punishment from God, so you can actually do something about it rather than just pray. And you take these medicines, and there's the concept of disease. And so it's really important. And obviously, this is a caricature. It's not like people think that way or thought that way in the times. But it's really important to understand that if you operate from a certain paradigm, like for instance, you're strictly scientific and materialist, and then you interact with AI in that kind of way, your intentions, what you're going to do, the actions you're going to put forward are going to lead you to certain results that may be exactly what we're fearing today, like for instance, AI taking over, enslaving us and all that stuff. Whereas if you operate from a different kind of paradigm, for instance, that AI is just the physical form or manifestation of this embryonic global consciousness of humanity that just cannot take any other form, then you start operating, you start interacting with those technologies and doing certain things and carrying out certain actions that are completely different. Even though they may look the same, they will be different. And another thought experiment, put yourself in the shoes of one of the cells inside your body, and then try to understand what subjective form they would give to the messages that you send from your brain via the nervous system all the way to your fingers so that they move like this. How would your individual cells subjectively understand that? Now, they receive the signals directly from the nervous system, right, the nerve endings. And so if they're not very careful, they would say, well, actually intelligence resides at the nerve tips, the nerve endings. That's where intelligence is, because that's where the information is transmitted, right? Your cells don't have this kind of capacity to look beyond their subjective little experience and to even imagine what your brain looks like, what your consciousness is, and even to understand what reality you're in, right? And so when we're looking at AI, we're looking at circuitry, we're looking at cables, we're looking at processors. But again, maybe that's us looking at the nerve endings of what it really is, and we just cannot see it because it's beyond what we humans can perceive and understand. And the last thought I wanted to leave you with is also kind of related to this paradigm shift, but it's the main message behind this talk is that none of what we're doing here, we're doing by chance. We're actually following a pattern, a fractal pattern of humanity developing as this collective global organism. And right now, it just so happens that we're at the stage of development where we are transitioning from representative democracy to self-governance, and then there are certain things that plug into that, like AI, for instance, the emergence of AI, or blockchain and all that stuff, to as like a physical manifestation of a pattern that we're just unconsciously replicating. And so the whole point of this talk is once you make that conscious, then you can let go of certain things, like for instance, how humanity has evolved before, which is you first have to demonize the existing system, saying, oh, it's bad, it's whatever, and have a long list of grievances, and then idealizing the new system, saying, oh, this is good, this is the future, this is what... and we're wasting so much energy in trying to dismantle the old and to prove that the new is the right thing. Whereas if you put this pattern in a conscious kind of manner, then you understand that it's kind of silly, you're wasting a lot of energy, and you should just like embrace this kind of natural flow of an evolutionary pattern that we're replicating on the outside. And so you don't need to be in this opposition, in dualism, and whatever, in all these power struggles. It's just about finding your place where you are on that sort of continuum of the transition between one system and another. Understand that it will take some time, and understand that also the smooth transitions are actually the best ones typically. When you try to do it abruptly, like in the case of the French Revolution that I talked about earlier, with this 14-year-old that like runaways from his parents and does crazy stuff, it's not the best kind of experience. The best experience would be, for instance, for governments themselves, which represent kind of like our symbolic parent, to realize that this process is like happening, and to gradually delegate certain powers or certain portions of of what they do to decentralized communities. Like for instance, we'll gradually decentralize garbage management. How about that? We'll give you that as a responsibility, and we'll see how you fare, and then we'll try to like cross-fertilize the super interesting kind of practices that have been developed in some communities and transpose them in another place. And then they'll transpose even more and more, like let's say road management, and then transportation, and then whatever. And as these decentralized communities show that they're capable of handling more and more and more things autonomously, then the government can sort of gradually fade, and decentralized systems can gradually take over. And it's the same with when you leave your parents' house, you can either slam the door saying, I don't need your money anymore, I don't care about you, whatever, you're the worst parents ever, and then you try to live like that, and then it works for 2 weeks and you have no money, you go live under a bridge for 2 weeks. And that's kind of how these decentralized systems and communities operate right now. Is like they have these, it works for a time, then it doesn't, and then they have to like go back to their parents for a bit and whatever. It's much easier if you have this kind of smooth process where time and again you go back to your parents' house, you have a good meal, maybe they help you a little bit financially if you have trouble, and dad comes to fix your curtains, and mom brings you lasagnas from time to time in your dorm. and eventually, after a couple of years, you don't need them, but it was a smooth process, and it wasn't this kind of drama-filled kind of thing. And that's also one of the things that we need to let go of humanity, is obviously our obsession with drama, because what I'm talking about here, the kind of ideal smooth scenario, is the most boring movie ever that nobody would go see, right? We're so obsessed with drama, and that's what we see all the time on TV and action movies and all that stuff, that it's almost as if we're making of our reality and our own adventure a sort of epic movie of this community that is fighting the government and all that stuff, and with all the adventure that comes with it, running and hiding and all that stuff. Sure, that's one way to go about it. The end result will be the same, because like I said, this is a pattern. It's just that subjectively you have to ask yourself now, which kind of experience do I prefer? And again, this is coming back to personal responsibility. Maybe some humans actually like and enjoy the whole opposition, like the government is evil and let's fight again. But one needs to understand that is a choice, a personal choice, and not something like, oh, I'm forced to live and interact with my government like that and do these other things because otherwise we'll never be free or whatever. No. It's a choice, and there are many different ways that this can happen. So I'll let you watch at the end of the video where I basically present my activities, and I hope you enjoyed this talk, and don't hesitate to leave a comment. Now a little bit about me, and then we're done. So what do I do? Well, I give these kind of talks trying to accompany the paradigm shift of looking at the world through a different lens that may think about old things in a new way, find novel solutions to old problems that you couldn't find through the old paradigm. Talks about economics and the future of finance, artificial intelligence, metaverse, blockchain, and then in general spirituality, philosophy. I like to dabble in all these kind of things. I also compose music, I write books, and at the professional level I'm doing a PhD on the metaverse, and I also work for a European NGO. And then as far as the books that I've written 3 books for adults: Mother Earth's Final Push, The Story of Humanity's Gestation. It's all this idea of projecting, looking at the macro from the micro, from the body, looking at what we've sort of collectively manifested on the outside, which is just sort of a fractal projection of what we have on the inside, but applied to many different things. A Future as One, everything is fine, everything is going as planned, and that's like saying that we are not doing any of this by chance. This is all sort of something that is in us, that we unconsciously manifest on the outside. And then I also wrote a book that is going to be published soon on like a singularity that talks from a different dimension to humanity. Really fun one. And then I also write children's books. So The Being and the Little Souls, introducing children to the concept of souls and spirituality in a non-religious way, and Ellen and the World in Color. So that's it from me, and if you have any questions, I'm here. Thank you. Any thoughts? Yes.
I have a question. Or I don't know if it's a question, but I'm very interested in ungovernance. So like I can create things that don't have anyone making decisions directly. Like there's not like whatever, a president or a Congress, or more of ways to allow people to decide and join different decision-making frameworks. So, I mean, I have like a crypto example that I normally give. I don't know if everyone will understand, but there's this one project called Compound, which is like this lending market, and it's like, there's this one DAO that governs this entire thing, and they decide what assets get to be lent against and all that kind of stuff. And then this other project forked them, and that was like $1 billion protocol, like one of the biggest ones out there. But people decided that they like moved too slow, and they didn't have the things that they wanted or whatever. But instead of just like copying their DAO and making a new DAO that controlled their own market, they made it so that anyone could create their own market. And then you could have all these different people that would have different asset management styles, and then people can choose what the risk levels were and all these types of things. So it decentralized the decision-making process and allowed anyone to do it. But then you also have to decide who you want to trust to make decisions for you. But it's not like a representative democracy where there is only one way for you to vote for someone, and then they go to this another like strict decision-making process in Congress or whatever. It's like, what if you wanted to make a new, totally different type of Congress? Or what if you actually want authoritarianism and things like that? So I'm wondering how that fits into your model.
So again, applying this from the perspective of humanity as a global collective organism, I would view the metaverse and AI as tools for experimenting and iterating plenty of different ways of interacting together as humanity without having to test it in the real world and figuring out it didn't work and people get hurt and whatever. So in the metaverse, or in Minecraft or whatever, you could have a zillion different worlds. Every one of them has their own rules, and people that like those rules join together and experiment those kind of sets of rules and see if they like it or not in a virtual environment. And in case it's a total failure or total chaos or whatever, no biggie. It's just a virtual trial run. The same happens when you close your eyes and you imagine yourself jumping off a cliff or doing plenty of crazy things. Intuitively, you sort of get the wisdom that may not have been a very good decision for you as a physical body to try that out, the thing that you imagined, see? And so I see it more that at the physical level, it's sort of the physical level governance will evolve much slower and will be informed by all of this wild experimentation that can be done in the virtual spaces, where you test this kind of ungovernance or whatever, and if you're ready for it, then it sort of trickles down into physical reality. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with humans in general. Like, children are more and more autonomous, more and more free as they learn, as they get more, mature and stuff. Like, maybe one day we'll be ready for that kind of interactions, but at the moment maybe we're not. And those kinds of virtual experiments is what's going to help us find out if we are not.
In this the model that you're talking about, I feel like it still seems that it's coming from a little bit from this individual type of perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're coming in where it's like, oh, how does the baby see it, or how does a child see a teenager, etc., without realizing that maybe like the whole council was made of babies as well, in theory. But I also do think that when we're thinking about tribal societies or in that type of way, saying that everything was magical and as if it was kind of, and I'm not saying this is what you're saying specifically, and you can correct me when I'm wrong, infantilization and a little bit of like, oh, that's so funny that you did magic, ha ha ha. Like, you think that the river is a god, while that is what helped us evolve and survive in all of those many years. And it seems like also a very Western type of perspective rather than the entirety of the earth of what I'm trying to like see with like the patterns of like what we have gone through as well. So it seems very much based on like the Eurocentric Western perspective. Yeah, and you brought Jack's here about him.
Jacques
So,
Long.
yes, I'm wondering, one second, here it is. For your research, what other cultures have you gotten into that led you to this model that you've created?
Okay, so first, answering your first question. So, as humans, like right now, we always see things with lenses of good and bad, right or wrong, and also different levels, like levels as in hierarchies. Whereas if you look at the growth of a fetus in the womb, can you say that a 1-month fetus is worse or better than a 2-month fetus? Or, it just doesn't make sense to think about it in that kind of way. It's more developmental stages that are perfect for the time being, for that kind of specific developmental stage. And in that sense, because I'm saying that what we are experiencing on the outside is just a fractal projection of what we experienced inside, that's why my story is not necessarily Western, it's more universal, because babies are always born and inside, they're always gestating inside mothers' wombs, right? No babies are sprout out of a cabbage or brought by a crane or something. And so that's a universal experience we've all shared as humanity. And the reason why I have a Western lens now is because the stage at which we have arrived as humanity right now is the Western kind of view or stage. Like, if you look at, for instance, what happens to a baby around 6 months pregnancy, the different organs grew separately and they don't work together until that point. Like, the stomach grows and that stuff, but they don't work collectively as a whole. They work in like kind of separate. And then they start functioning together as a global collective associated to each other, and the baby starts swallowing, amniotic fluid, and also feeds off of its mother's, amniotic fluid in that way, and then the whole sort of tract digestive system, everything sort of clicks together and works as a whole. That is globalization, basically. If you think of humanity as different separate civilizations that don't even know about each other, and then there's this process of bringing them together under a one global collective, it's globalization. But because as humanity, we are doing things unconsciously, and we have to dabble with concepts like barbarians versus civilized and all kinds of things, you distort something that is a sort of a pure biological unconscious pattern into something that is skewed with duality, with problems, with all kinds of issues. So in terms of different cultures, all of the different worldviews, whether it's tribal wisdom or whatever, I see all of them as something that needs to be integrated. Because if you look at biology or even your own development as a baby into infancy and adolescence and adulthood, it's not that you shed what you were before and kill your former self and think of, oh my God, I was so stupid at 5 and I hate myself, and now I'm so smart because I am this new person, Nicole, whatever. No, it's an integrative process where you integrate what you've learned from those different stages into what you are. And the problem with humanity now is that we have this logic of almost like making harsh, kind of cuts, like, oh, all the people in the past, they were stupid, and now we're correct, and this is the only way of viewing the world.
I haven't had that experience.
Of
the entire world getting like cutting things.
Exactly, yeah, and that's a problem. That's definitely a problem. I think...
haven't seen that. That's what I'm saying. Like what I'm trying to think about it. So in your analogy, you're talking about seeing the stages of humanity in the same way that we're seeing the stages of a human being developing, both all the way from the womb, all the way out to becoming adult and being a young adult, etc. Right? And you're also talking about integrating, pre-rational, rational, and trans-rational type of, thinking,
That's kind of,
and trying to do the repeat back to kind of see if that's accurate. And what you're saying is that with your slide, you're saying that it can be kind of universal because, everybody is born from a mother and everybody, has to go through the womb process and come out and do, whatever we do as, in that developmental stage, right?
Yeah, so I'm saying that this is like the DNA, basically, the raw inspiration or information that we all have to start with when we're born.
Okay.
It's like that's why I'm talking about fractals, is because a fractal is like this template or pattern, and then when you scale it up, and it does amazing things, but it's always based on this one, pattern, initial pattern. I see I have difficulty with something, but
yeah. Like let's say you're an orphan or something. You're a baby, you were popped up, somehow you were raised by wolves or something. What stage are you at?
But that's the thing. Like if you look at the diversity in cultures in our world, basically, it definitely reflects, for instance, how mothers went through their pregnancy, how they experienced it, which also sort of reflects back on how the baby experienced it, and also how the children are raised. Like in some societies, like the Bushman, civilizations in Botswana, for instance, they live in a completely different kind of way, and they're raised like by the whole tribe, and even like certain concepts don't exist in their language, so they've never experienced them. Like the word evil doesn't exist, the word property doesn't exist, and so they have a unique kind of experience that's super imprinted on a template that is universal, because of the concepts and the way that their culture and their interactions between parents and child happened. And once that is projected as a governance system on the outside, then it becomes something much more, inclusive or communal or whatever. So it's just that Western civilization, this is a bit harsh, I guess, to say, but in order to form a collective global organism of 8 billion people, materialist science and the Western way of viewing the world was the only way to do it. There's no other way to say it. And that's why we have a Western kind of dominated society or civilization, is because with sort of tribal, beliefs and systems and all that stuff, you can't create a planetary global, collective, interconnected consciousness of 8 billion humans.
Yes, there's seen here another way to see what she is trying to point out, and I want to share this.
Mm-hmm.
What I hear is she likes to bring us to the fourth state of your 5 stages that you gave at the end.
Mm-hmm.
The third stage was that the eye mirrors back our own biases.
Yeah.
So, and to go beyond that, we need to check our own biases.
Oh, for sure.
And what she's doing there, she's starting to check the biases. Everything is has to be put into question that you bring out for us. So the process to go from the third to the fourth stage is actually what she tries to bring us into, because who can know for sure how it really works? So we really have to check all the biases. There is no truth that can be shared from one perspective. It's completely open, and we need this openness to go to the fourth stage and then to the fifth stage. And in this way, it's fascinating to see how it's already brought in immediately through Nicole, this upstaging.
You know, sometimes you have to think of things in a non-dual way. So otherwise, you have emotions and stuff that come in and sort of, you know, distort what you're trying to think about. Like for instance, when you have cycles like the seasons, right? And in the winter, you're wearing a coat because it's cold. And then spring comes, then summer. Do you rip off your coat and say, this coat is evil, it's making me sweat, it's terrible, and you know, you burn it and you sort of say, and the t-shirt is good and is the only thing that has ever mattered. That's kind of a silly way to look at things. But rather you should think of like, you know, these clothes that you wear as a sort of an adequacy between how you feel and what's necessary at a certain time in a given cycle or weather. And so if you think of like even the debt-based monetary system or representative democracy, rather than looking at that as good and bad or, you know, Western or whatever, just it's assuming that whatever we've experienced up until now has been quote unquote perfectly tailored to the necessity for humanity as a collective to grow as a consciousness. And that doesn't mean that we need to wear it anymore. Like we can now shed it, or we can, because it's, you know, like your coat after winter, you know, it's too warm, you just shed it and you move on to something else. But I find that as humanity, we waste too much time in trying to prove that something is bad to give us a legitimate reason to move beyond it and say, oh, but look at all the harm that is done, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I'm wearing this coat and I first have to do all of the things that I'm sweating, I'm too warm, I'm thirsty, blah, 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 blah. Now I have a legitimate reason to remove it, say that it's evil, and put a t-shirt on. I mean, that's, to me, it's a waste of time and resources. You know what I mean?
Well, yes, and I think that that's coming at it like, so you know how I mentioned pre-rational, rational, and trans-rational perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with just this simple rational perspective is that you cannot differentiate between the people that are in trans-rational and pre-rational. And I think that's a little bit of kind of what you're bringing up, and that everything has like a type of cycle and everything else. And we cannot also ignore like the Eastern, for example, you know, sphere, or the type of sure, you cannot. It's not about good or bad. It's just if you don't acknowledge it, you know, it's like he was saying is, I like this quote that biases are like assholes. You don't really take a look at your own, you know, like very often you have to, like, unless something's going wrong, you're like, oh wait, like there's something there. And I think that that's part of this might seem like it's coming from the assumption that the social contract was something that we all kind of decided to buy into, and that it was something that was absolutely necessary for the type of stage of humanity that we are now.
Yeah.
While, you know, like we were going really good around like, you know, I would say like, sure, I'm gonna go Western because that's also more of my, you know, education is Greeks-ish, you know, except for all of the like blatant sexism that, you know, like women are deformed men, but like they were going into this type of way that was going a little bit into philosophizing about all sorts of different things, and there was different female philosophers, so there was all sorts of different, you know, ideologies, and then religion was like, "Fuck you," and then like fucked it up in many ways, right? And sure, it did provide some structure that the organizational structure in some way, and I do think that that was definitely something that didn't necessarily help with the evolutionary consciousness of humanity to move forward in the in that way. So for the AI and self-governance and all of those type of things is who's putting the inputs, where are the inputs coming from, what are their biases, and that's why AI can end up having all of these type of more like racism issues, because if you give it racist inputs, like you were saying, it's like, oh, if you come at it from, oh, AI is going to destroy us, and you give it that input, then yeah, it's going to figure out that humanity is evil, right? That's what you were talking about.
Absolutely.
And same thing happens with like the decision making and everything else, because I do have more faith in humanity than just to say that we're not in that evolutionary path of like, we're not conscious enough to do our own self-governance. I think that we are. I think that we just have to have more, natural hierarchies that arise, and there's scalable ways to do that. Yeah, could they be more efficient with AI? Absolutely, but I don't know. I do think that humans are inherently good.
Yeah. Well, to your point, though, just to finish with that, because
yes,
there's so many things to say about what you just said. It's not like I see the future as 100,000 people sitting in front of their computers and saying what they want, not talking to each other, and then an AI sort of does the math and says, distributes whatever, tries to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
The whole point is to get together as a community remains super, super important. But for what reason? Not necessarily to discuss and debate in detail about problems, but to get to know each other so that you can interact from the heart space and not from your fears. So there's so much time wasted in communities building consensus because people talk about their fears and not about, feeling included, welcome, and good in order to express what they really feel and what they really want. And that's something that you need to sort of sift through, because if everybody speaks from the level of their fears, then AI can't make sense of that. And so it's super important that humanity actually continues to be very social and socializing and creating these community spaces just to cultivate the state of being in each human to be able to speak from their heart space, so then when AI has to match up things, it ends up matching things from a place of kind of love and, higher kinds of emotions and wants and desires, and not from a place of fear. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks a lot. I think we need to catch an Uber, otherwise we'll be late.
Yes.
But yeah.
Thanks.